All right, so hey everybody, I want to welcome you to tonight's event on innovation in higher education. My name is Dr. Adam Gamwell, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Human Science Task Force and the host of this Anthro Life podcast. As well, I'm one of two voices on the Experience by Design podcast with our other host tonight, Dr. Gary David. So the Human Science Task Force is a coalition of thinkers and doers. Hey, Gary, how's it going?
Good, Adam. How are you?
That's pretty good, yeah. So I'll just let the good folks know about the Human Science Task Force, which is a coalition of thinkers and makers and doers, like these good folks here, that work across intellectual traditions, academy, and industry, whose aim is to help those who dedicate their lives to understand the human condition in the world to have more of an influence on it. And so I'm really excited to have Gary run this panel and all these great folks we're going to bring on shortly to go over higher education as one of these really interesting places in which we, some of the formative years for many people and formative forms of education. But as we know, things are kind of rocky right now. So what's going on with higher education, Gary? Lots of things, huh?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, the idea behind the Higher Ed is Dead, Long Live Higher Education event we're having right now was to explore this issue of what's going on with higher education and can it be saved? And also, is it worth saving? And so to answer some of these questions, we assembled a very esteemed group of guests who can help us with exploring what higher ed is going to look like if it is going to survive and in what form.
We're expanding. All right.
We are expanding. So we have with us tonight, like I was saying, a wonderful group of people. And let me introduce them. So we have President Suzanne Walsh. And President Walsh is the president of Bennett College, which is a historically Black college and university, or just historically Black college, HBCU, located in North Carolina. And before her stint at Bennett College, which is relatively recent, she was also at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, if you've heard of that before, as a deputy officer. Am I correct?
Deputy director, if you want to get
fancy. Director. Well, we're all about fancy here, as you can tell. We also have Dr. Elizabeth Medina, who has a lot of job titles, actually. She is the vice president for student affairs. She is the chief diversity officer. And if that wasn't enough to occupy her day, she's also the Title IX coordinator at Concordia University. More importantly, for me, she's a sociologist. And sociologists are always valuable to have in the room. Most people just don't know why. And so we have to do the work of trying to explain that to them. We also have Lauren Wallman, who comes from a country, let me check my notes, called Canada. And she is also known as the Learning Pirate. And one of the things that I've found out from knowing Lauren recently is that there is actually a science behind learning. And after teaching for 30 years, it's probably a good thing that I just found that out, that there's actually ways of studying how people learn and how we're supposed to teach them. Nobody told me. How was I supposed to know? And she has an extensive background in neuroscience. And then we also have Ken. Hi, Ken. And Ken Gordon is a good friend. He's a principal communication specialist at EPAM Continuum. They do amazing work around innovation and design across a number of industries, including higher ed. Also, what's interesting about Ken is he is a freshman enrolling in college and going to school this fall. So he's not only a chief thought leader, he's also a parent sending a child to school. So, hi, Ken.
This is all true. Hi, Gary. What's up?
How you doing? So the format for tonight is like this. We wanted to have something a little bit irreverent but knowledgeable. A lot of podcasts, except for our podcast with Adam, and a lot of webinars sound kind of boring because they're often academic and very staid and very formal. We wanted to try to interject some fun into the format by being a little outside the box in terms of our thinking, and also to explore some of those hard questions that a lot of webinars just aren't going to explore. And so we're very fortunate to have this distinguished panel and to explore some of these questions and topics. Now, if you have any questions, those watching, there is a comments box that you can find. You can type your question into there, and somebody, either Adam or Phil, who you can't see, will feed me those questions. We can also incorporate those questions into our conversation. And just remember, like I tell all my students, there is no dumb question. That's not always true, but it's what we tell them anyway. Well, I mean, we've all been there, right? And I should introduce myself a little bit. My name is Gary David. I'm a sociologist at Bentley University, which is a small business school right outside of Boston. I'm also a consultant. I work in experience design, including learning experience. So looking forward to having the panel. So the first thing I wanted to do is share my screen. Bye, Adam. First thing I wanted to do is share my screen and talk about higher education. And the first topic that I think, if we can get that shared, Phil, higher education, it had a good run. So here's a story recently that I really caught my eye. I'd like to get people's comments on. College students sue for refunds amid coronavirus. Now, a lot of schools were really put out, including mine, by having to reimburse for room and board costs, which obviously students weren't able to use their rooms, so we can't charge them room and board. But more interestingly is this. Students at the University of Miami have filed a class action lawsuit claiming they have paid for in-person courses at a higher rate, and with online instruction, they aren't getting what they paid for this semester. Students at Drexel University in Pennsylvania have filed a similar suit and asked for tuition refunds. So I want to ask, Lauren, if I can ask you this question. Is that reasonable to ask for a refund given that online learning is an inferior product, given your experience in developing and designing learning? Is this something that students have an argument about?
Well, I'm not going to claim that online learning is inferior. Where we could get a little philosophical is what are you actually paying for? Are you paying for a building? Are you paying for a professor? Or you're paying for an education? So I think that the narrative really has to come down to that, is where is the value? Where are those dollars that they're requesting? Where is that really should be the narrative, not necessarily give me my money back because I can't stay in dorm, because if it's about spending money to stay in a dorm, anyone who spent any given time in a dorm during their college or university days, we know what happens in dorms. So for that, I would say that's probably not a good argument for wanting refunds. But I think we really need to question is a more intelligent look at that, which is what is it that you're actually requesting and what's the value of that, and where is that narrative going?
So Ken, on that point, as a parent who I assume recently cut a check for his child to be in school, would you be in a situation where if your child was exclusively online, would you be expecting a discount, or is this something that you're not really expecting? You're expecting the same quality of education?
I'm hoping for the same quality of education. We'll see. I'm willing to give my university the shot. I am not going to go in there assuming that I will get the kind of education I had as an undergraduate. But to be honest, I think my school is setting things up in the right way. I've been to a bunch of different webinars about how they plan on delivering the education, and it seems they're doing pretty much everything they can do in this moment to deliver something of quality.
What are some of the things they're doing that, as a parent and as a person who does design work, what are some of the things that they're doing that you find to be most comforting or most on point with what the requirements of the moment are?
Well, they're having the freshman class come on campus first, just the freshmen. My daughter happens to be a freshman right now. So they're showing how important the freshman experience is, and it really is. They're doing it. They're going to be COVID testing twice a week. They're going to be delivering all the lectures via distance with some very small groups. So I think they're making the best of the blended learning experience. They're going to be using the big empty rooms in different ways, and all these things seem to be the right thing to do.
Dr. Medina, right? Or Liz, if I may, or Dr. Medina. Concordia has. Let me fill us in. Does Concordia have a significant portion online? Is this a new model for you? Or is this what you're used to and you've been doing it for a long time?
Yes, this is such an important piece of the conversation, because I think for institutions that are making the pivot, a university like the one where I am, who is accustomed to being flexible and nimble and inventive and creative and innovative, and is not necessarily risk averse, but also has a deep seatedness in caring for our community to guide us, that it's been really great for us to think about how the work we've been doing as a university has in some ways positioned us to weather this storm, so to speak. And to Lauren and Ken's point, I also in student affairs have been on a number of webcast with parents and families and new students with these very things in mind, and the conversations are very much centered around the quality of the experience. How do we make sure that we're delivering, as we say, on our promise, and staying aligned with our mission of centering care for people, and doing it through a modality that we're committed to doing. There's lots of behind the scenes technical training. There's lots of creativity on the student experience side that I oversee in terms of how do we create community and connection and enthusiasm across the modality. And I think it's that sort of, asset-based thinking rather than deficit that's really helping us and other institutions like ours that are not as entrenched in the traditions of it must be done this way. So
there's got to be, I always wonder about this, there's got to be a little bit, maybe just a little bit of looking at schools, even like mine, or more traditional schools that have not really embraced the online learning approach as much as other schools like yours. There's got to be a little bit of satisfaction, maybe just a little bit, of watching the rest of us just panic and go, how in the world are we going to figure this out, while schools like yours are like sitting back, just kind of like, oh, well, good luck with that. Is there a little bit?
Well, as someone who has had a longevity of experience at a variety of institutions, certainly just the nature of the circumstance, the uncertainties are challenges. But I think it's we've talked about having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset in terms of how you approach these life challenges. And I think in no better place than institutions of higher education that are about lifelong learning and growth experiences, both positive and challenging, that we would get to live that out, sort of walk our talk. So, I don't want to suggest that there's not some trepidation, okay, right? But certainly I think our community sort of gathering around this is we will push through this, and not only will we push through it, we'll be better because of it.
And I think one of the points you made, which is so great, I want to ask President Walsh about this fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. People think it's one of these tropes that, higher education is so liberal. In some ways, I guess on some measures it is. It's also tremendously conservative and resistant to any kind of change whatsoever. And I've been around higher education now for 25 plus years working in it. I know that you're more recent in higher education, coming from Bill and Melinda Gates, as well as other work that you've done. What's it been like to try to get people to adopt a growth mindset and shift from a fixed mindset, especially not because you want to here, because a lot of us, you have to, because if you don't, if you do business as usual in an unusual time, you're going to be caught out and not be able, now you're not going to be around very long.
Well, so the last time I was in higher ed was probably about 20 something years ago. And so sometimes I say it hasn't changed, that like the characters are all still the same, but I was at a community college the last time. And so the characters are recognizable to me. The issues are recognizable. It's just now we're in the 21st century. Last time I was in, it was the 20th century.
Right.
But I think what's been really interesting, and I talked about this with faculty and staff recently, there are a number of things that I came in and was recommending, and every single time I'd recommend something. So I've been in the role, it'll be a year next week, or maybe tomorrow even, I don't know, August. And I came into the role and I had suggestions for things, and every single time the reaction was, nope, impossible. We're not doing it. Nope, that's not us. And then what would happen would be over time, people would sort of think about it, and then they would sort of come back and go, I mean, maybe, maybe that thing. And then they would start to kind of like send me articles and email of things that they had read. So they were still thinking about it. And I introduced Slack to Bennett College this year, which I know. But I was like, I can't have an inbox full of just interesting one-off ideas. I was like, we need to share with the world. So anyway, I've been able to watch even then in a more public space, like how these ideas evolve, to the point that then almost inevitably in the end, people go, yeah, we could do that, but we could do it in our way. And so one of our colleagues refers to it as Benetizing things. We can make it we can do it the Bennett way. And so what I think is interesting in higher education and bringing people along in any change initiative is to say, like, throw out the scary idea, give it time, Like, keep feeding it, keep working on it, keep coming back and reminding people. Let them play with the idea, let them make it better. In terms of, for this, it was both faculty and staff had things that I was challenging them with, and they came back and every time was better. So if I had said in the beginning of the year, we're all of a sudden going to go completely remote, nobody
Right.
chooses to come to Bennett either as a student or a faculty or staff member because they want to be online or virtual. If I had given them more warning, I think they would have been like, oh, no. But they did it. And so I'm like, you were skeptical for like 2 hours because that was all you had. And then look at you now. And so that's
Right.
kind of, I think that just continues to be, I think the exciting part about being at Bennett, quite frankly, is like I see that same trajectory. And that to me means we can move on. We can move forward because I have evidence that they can do stuff that they thought was impossible.
So it makes me think, and maybe Lauren can answer this. What's wrong with the academic brain? You study neuroscience.
Ooh.
It seems to be defective. That and I'm speaking as an academic. Our brains, as highly developed as they might be, I've also been trained to be exceptionally narrow and focused and fixed. So what is wrong with our brain? And is the academic brain, is there science on whether it's salvageable, or do we just have to, get rid of the academic?
No, just give up now. No.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a great webinar.
When we revert back to what you were asking, Suzanne, about, fixed versus a growth mindset, now we're getting into the territory of behaviors and habits. And when we look at the institution of education, when we look at, how it evolved, did it evolve? It's 120 years roughly of the same. So, even myself, if I were to, I haven't been in the classroom for about 20 years now. I know if I went back into the classroom, it would not look much different. And it's because of these habits and these behaviors and these beliefs that mostly all of us have experienced through our educational careers, that we then, again, we grew up, but we took those same beliefs and patterns and habits and behaviors. And those are incredibly challenging to change in an adult brain. Essentially past the age of about 35, your beliefs and behaviors they've got very strong pathways in there. So we talk sometimes about unlearning and then relearning, but you really do have to go in and practice and rehearse, and in order to, start a new belief or behavior. But again, 120 years roughly of doing the same thing, it's a big battle. So it's no surprise to me, similar to the conversations that I'm sure Liz and Suzanne and kind of had and yourself with academics. It's when you've been doing something for like a smoker, when you've been doing something for that long, it is very challenging because the brain instantly wants to revert back to what's comfortable and what's safe and what's familiar. And that's why learning in itself, what I think people don't recognize, learning is hard. It's not meant to be very easy. It's meant to challenge us and to push us out of our comfort zones, because that's the way that this actually, biologically changes.
So we got the biological perspective, Dr. Medina, the sociological perspective. We got to balance things out here, go from the brain to the social. So thoughts about what we're talking about, why academics are irredeemable or something related to that topic.
Well, as someone who still considers themselves a practitioner scholar, I think we're salvageable at the least. But I do think a really good point, as my fellow sociologist, you can appreciate some of what Lauren said resonated as well as part of cycle of socialization, right? Like, so when you think of institutionalized ways of being, society's higher education or the system of education, I can't think of, too many more that are really throughout our entire life cycle. And I was just having this conversation in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but it applies here as well, which is there's also the cycle of liberation and thinking about how do we begin to learn, as Lauren pointed out, but also unlearn some behaviors and ways of being and thinking and entrenchment. And we like to label it tradition. And I appreciate so much what President Walsh had to say, because we say the Concordia way, right? And there are some really great pieces of that, and some pieces that in a positive way are entrenched in our legacy and history. And then there are some things that we also recognize that are no longer a part of who we are today and who we aspire to be. And that's where I think those opportunities to liberate ourselves from these things that are holding us back from being innovative, creative, and continuing to learn are important. So that's my best sociological perspective on that.
I think that works. Ken, I can
Gary, can I just jump in here for a second?
Yourself. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, man. I think if you think about the labor pool on these college campuses, right? And you have people who have jobs for life. The idea of that tenured professors. Where do you see that in any other? Well, hopefully you have your tenure down, but you think about that and that kind of sort of unyielding solidity. These people who cannot be fired, and then you have all the adjuncts who are being vastly exploited. Who are really starting to rise up. It's something that schools have to figure out. Really, how are they going to treat the educators on their campuses? And I think we're in for reckoning. We're seeing it now, and it's indicative of sort of where we're stuck and where there's going to be a huge clash coming up, and we have to think about that in a better, more realistic and holistic way, I think.
I'm glad you raised that because, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think it's also figuring out who those faculty champions are. Because I get nervous when we're just like the faculty, because it's not a monolith, right? And so I think that there are some incredible talent. And then there's also folks that you're like, oh Lord. But if you can find those folks who are ready and excited about this opportunity, there are people that you wouldn't expect who are embracing this moment. That's where I'm putting more of my energy into who's ready, who's like, oh yeah, did you say we're doing something crazy? I'm in. Like who's on that? And I don't really pay attention to those who are like, I don't want to do it, because I can't drag them along. This is, if you can't be moved by this moment in time, there's nothing that's going to move you. But for those who are ready to be moved, they are diving in and they're doing tremendous work. But I want to kind of get the balance, because otherwise it would be depressing. And then we would have to say higher ed is dead. Like if there's nobody who's willing to come along.
Well, I think, part of this, and it's going to get me to my next slide as well, this is what I kind of bristle when people talk about student experience, because the student is part of the equation. The learning experience, from a person who does systems design, the learning experience is more of a broader ecosystem that needs to be integrated, which includes faculty, staff, students, parents, business, alumni, community, etc., and how that all comes together. And when we think about the faculty, quote unquote, it does bring me to this slide. And Phil, if you could show the slide for me, because this is one of the questions I think is being raised increasingly, the right not to work, right? This idea that faculty members concerned about health and safety want to say in the conditions under which they'll be working if they are expected to teach in person next fall. And teaching online for another semester is so far outside many professors' original job descriptions that it is nearly as unpalatable to some as being shut in a room with students. Even so, many professors say they prefer a remote term or even a delayed academic year to teaching face-to-face again too soon. So it does raise this question about what are faculty's rights, knowing that, as Ken has pointed out, some of us, not all of us, some of us have tenure. Some are trying to perform to tenure. So people who are tenure track, what's the coercion and the power differential about when you're asking for volunteers to teach on campus? Do they feel put upon that they need to do it for their jobs? And academics as well, especially on the arts and sciences and liberal arts side, because I know in business, a lot of the adjuncts actually have full-time jobs, at least at my school. They aren't dependent upon the academic income versus professional adjuncts, which you tend to find more arts and sciences and humanities. So Dr. Medina, about this question, how's your campus dealing with some of these larger questions about faculty not being sure if they want to work on campus or having some selection and say in their working modality?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question, and I have to say that your commentary on the learning experience just really opened up my eyes in this moment. I think I've been articulating something in the vein of that, but didn't have the language, because it's always about the faculty, the staff, the students, our entire community, right? Which is centered in an academic pursuit for students, but it's not absent of parents and families and all of the things that you've just talked about. So I really appreciate that point as well. But I think what you're talking about has really spoken to me from my lens most currently as Chief Diversity Officer, because I've been talking a lot about the diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly the equity pieces of that conversation. And for a campus that, you know, is really working towards a true actionable commitment to that work, it's about having those tough conversations, just like you talked about, what are the differentials, right, for a senior faculty member or an adjunct or a newer faculty hire, right? Those realities are very different. What does that look like across other forms of identity, right? And so one of the things that, you know, I've been really pleased with is that we are really talking through, having those difficult dialogues and trying to not retrofit. So I keep reminding people the difference between equity and equality, right? And it's like, it's not
Right.
one size fits all, right? But so we have to really create opportunities to hear directly from people about their individual lived experiences and how we can support and facilitate their success as they support the success of our students in the classroom. And so that's my long-winded way of saying, you know, we've had those intentional conversations, and to the degrees humanly possible, also because of our identity as an institution, we've been able to say, we will do everything we can to support your safety, health, and well-being, and make this, you know, a good teaching and learning experience. And I realize that that is not the case at all institutions across higher ed. So I certainly don't take
Right.
it for granted. And it's not an easy thing to do. You know, it would be easier to sort of across the board say, this is what we're doing or not doing, versus let's case by case, situation by situation, you know, nuance it so that people feel fully supported and empowered and have the tools they need. So I'm really encouraged by us as an institution being able to do that. But I also know it doesn't come without a certain amount of commitment and hard work to really do that and do it well.
So President Walsh, I also know that you, on this point about making decisions, that your school was one of the first, you know, in our pre-production meeting, one of the first to say, no, we're just going to be fully online in the fall. We're not going to risk it. What was that experience like of being out there while so many other schools were kind of playing the game of, we're not going to quite say it yet because we still want people, and I know that, I'm not criticism, right? We don't want people to pull their deposits and go for a cheaper alternative. We want to kind of keep talking about being on campus as if some of it's going to be normal. You were out there. So what was that experience like, being so far out in front?
Well, our whole decision was grounded in public health. And so it's not that, I mean, in some level, it's not that hard. If you say we're prioritizing the health and well-being of our students, faculty, and staff, then that's what we're doing. And that has risks. I mean, it has risks for lower enrollment. It has risks for cutting into your finances as an independent college, but I'm not going to risk people's lives. I mean, that's just point blank. That's the starting point. So it doesn't make it that difficult. I think what makes it difficult is you have to be then able to say, and we're going to keep going based on that decision. Like, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep making sure that our faculty have the training that they need this summer. We did pulse surveys of our students, faculty, and staff. You know, our students and our faculty both were like, that last semester was not, it wasn't amazing. You know, like we went remote, and everybody is in agreement. And so the faculty have committed, and they've been in training this summer. And they're continuing to receive training as they're preparing their new courses. So I think as long as we make a commitment and then say, and we're going to support you to be successful. So we have a set of things we're doing for faculty and staff, and we have a set of things we're doing for students to help students to be more successful in this environment as well. Once we could make all of those decisions, I think that made it a lot easier. But it's, in the end, it wasn't simple, but it was
Right.
just the ethical and moral thing to do given our student population and our faculty and staff. It's very specific. You know, it's women of color make up a majority of our faculty and staff. Not only do they make up our students. So from that sense, I think
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think, and maybe at Concordia, it's the same thing. A lot of schools talk about a value proposition. You all have a values proposition, that there are values that drive people's commitment to the institution, where I think a lot of schools, can't speak for all of them, obviously, there's a lot out there, it's much more transactional. It's, we want to treat you as a customer and show you the value proposition. And even you come here, we have, like, you know, a splash park and sushi and everything else, and you'll get a job, without the larger values proposition, which I think you can tell me if I'm wrong, made your decision a little bit safer and easier, because people who wanted to come to Bennett wanted to come there because they believed in the institution.
I think that's right. I mean, we spent a lot of time like drip feeding information all semester, whereas it was like a lot of like stage whispers. We may not be back in the fall. Like, just like, it was just period. You know, you would hear if they saw me do an interview, if our students, faculty, or staff saw me do an interview, they would hear me because I was thinking out loud, because I was looking at the data consistently. And so I think part of it too, I love this phrase and I will be using it, values proposition. You know, once we said that health is number one, and people understood that Black women's health is a very important topic. It's a topic that doesn't get a lot of discussion. It doesn't get a lot of attention. It doesn't get prioritized. So I think you're exactly right that was part of what really was very helpful. And the fact that we were very clear the whole time. We posted on our website, we sent out emails to everybody to say, here's the decision criteria that we will be using in our discussions with the board. And it's ultimately a board decision. I wanted to say one other thing about the students and, you know, how we think about our students. I had really strong feedback from one of our students about, you know, the college really only pays attention to, we have fresh women, you know, to fresh women. Like, it's the recruitment of them. That's all you celebrate. That's all the college cares about. That was a really poignant and actually like a really hurtful, like, she wasn't trying to hurt me, but it hurt to hear that feedback, because her point was, those of us who are upper class women, nobody's like, you don't get excited to find out we're coming back. And so we took that very seriously. And we are trying to not just celebrate fresh women, but celebrate all of our classes this year coming back, because we are excited to see them. They are buying into our values, as you said. And we need to be able to say we're celebrating that, as opposed to just getting excited about the new students.
So knowing the audience and delivering the experiences to the audience, experience design always comes back to experience design. And I want to share a screen. I'm really interested in getting everyone's perspective, especially you, Lauren and Ken, on this slide, because it really comes down, and if people have questions, feel free to ask your questions in the chat, in the comment box. Will traditional colleges and universities become obsolete? This was in Smithsonian Magazine. And one of the key points to call out of this is lack of student demand is already closing 800 out of roughly 10,000 engineering colleges in India. And online learning has put as many as half the colleges and universities in the US at risk of shutting down in the next couple decades, as remote students get comparable educations over the internet without living on campus or taking classes in person. Unless universities move quickly to transform themselves into educational institutions for a technology-assisted future, they risk becoming obsolete. So, Lauren, is it a comparable education over the internet? And what is the impact? I mean, it's not quite neuroscience, but what would be the psychological impact? As I told people when they asked about, you know, the relevance of higher ed, I said, well, where do you want your 18-year-olds to go once they graduate high school? They got to go someplace. Do you want them just kind of live at home and eat boxes of cereal on the couch all day until they can find a job? Ken's saying no. Ken's saying he does not want that. That's one parent who's saying no. I want them to go away. So, Lauren, on this point, comparable education, schools shutting down, will we become obsolete? Or what would have to be done for us to become obsolete technologically?
So when I think about my my university experience and sitting in a lecture hall with 300 other students for 3 hours in a psych course, I could have been anywhere. I could have my eyes probably were
As a
closed.
matter
at
of
some
fact,
points
for
during
those lectures, I
lectures.
was someplace else because I never attended one large lecture for my Psych 100. So while you were there, good for you. I actually literally was someplace else, not paying attention.
Right. So, I think for me, it's, are we seeing an influx of virtual reality campuses? Yes, we are. Are they giving a secondary option for either campuses that have decided to not bring students back, but still want to engage them in a social experience, which is definitely part of learning. And I think that's part of the excitement of being a new student in college or university is going and meeting and having that social experience as well. But can we please bring the narrative back to the learning? You are there to learn. You are there to acquire skills and behaviors and knowledge. And yes, the physical environment supports all of that. There's absolutely no doubt. But I think from early case studies right now, from companies who are now successfully bringing, maybe not an entire, we haven't seen an entire semester. We haven't seen what that looks like in a virtual campus, but we are seeing great moves towards at least maintaining a social environment in a virtual space. Do I think that's going to be, are we going to be living like the Jetsons? Are we going to be driving our floating cars in the airs, to school? Probably not. But I think if we don't focus on really what's important here, we're going to miss this opportunity in 100%. So is it about a virtual reality, augmented reality, being on campus? No. Can we please focus on the opportunities to increase our abilities to teach our students, first of all, immensely important skills, being able to self-regulate, understanding how they learn, monitoring their own learning so that they can actually take more out of the experience of what they're learning. And then from the opposite side of it, from those who are providing the education, can we upskill our educators? And of course, I'm going to advocate for the science as always, but there is a science to learning. And there is a way to more effectively design learning, not just lesson plan, but design learning where it will actually create a whole new experience just by changing that one component. Right. So that's my take on it.
Well, I want to get the design question to Ken, but I'm old enough, right, unfortunately, to remember Second Life. Remember Second Life? Remember the idea of Second Life, where we were all, you could go there. I remember a friend of mine was working for a company. I went to his house one night. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm interviewing a prospective employee in Second Life. I'm like, what are you talking about? Stores were setting up mock displays of clothing racks in Second Life. Second Life was going to be this other place. I'm surprised we haven't had a resurgence of Second Life with college campuses, right? This idea of, you don't need a physical, you're just going to go in Second Life. So Ken, does that...
It's Animal
Crossing too. And by Minecraft, Bennett College. When our pre-meetings, President Walsh said that Bennett was a cross between Wakanda and Hogwarts. So we got to get on that. We got to get on that Minecraft Bennett campus so people can go and whatever my kids do on Minecraft. So Ken, designing the future of higher education. I know EPAM Continuum has recently come out with a wonderful read on some pushing the boundaries ideas of designing things. I know you've had other engagements with other universities. So thoughts on the prospects of redesigning things, as Lauren was talking about, to really dramatically change the nature of what we think we're supposed to do and how we do it.
Yeah, man, there's so many great assets that colleges have developed over the years. There's so many things that are there and so many things that they're added into the experience that what we really need to do is take a whole holistic look at what the experience is. What can we do best online? What can we do best person to person? What are the functions of the different kinds of interactions we have on campus? And really think about redesigning it from every single part of it. It requires a lot of work because, as we've talked about, this experience hasn't changed much in over 100 years. So we've developed things that can be used, and it's the idea of having that sort of that abundance mindset. And saying, wow, we've got all these great things here. This is the way it was. what can we like Lego bricks, how can we rearrange it to make it better?
Right.
And I think that's going to require a strong will on the part of the schools to do that, willingness to say, yeah, we've got to change it, and a willingness on the students to say we'll try something new, and willingness on the parents to wait a little bit while these schools figure it out to see if they can actually deliver on the value that goes to the cost of what the education is, right? That value to cost ratio is a hard thing to calculate. And anybody, a really enlightened parent, student, administrator, teacher understands that this fall is a prototype. We're figuring it out now. We're trying things out. The really smart schools will realize that they have to prototype iteratively. And as the semester goes along, do what President Walsh is doing, which is she takes in the input, she gets what they're saying to her, and redesigns on the fly. I think that's a huge thing that a lot of organizations and institutions aren't comfortable or used to doing. And I think that's what's going to have to happen now, immediately, going forward, and fast.
Can I add something to that, please?
Absolutely, Lauren. We got some questions coming in too, but go ahead, please.
I just want to quickly tag on to what Ken was saying, is that in this new sort of era and in this opportunity to redesign, I think that's something that really should be focused on. I had plenty of interactions with a lot of colleges, universities, K through 12s here, and one of the biggest faults that I saw over the last few months was that they were purchasing texts that they didn't know how to effectively design or use. So they wasted sometimes upwards of millions of dollars of money to only then take what was already in a lecture format and throw it up on a video, put their TAs and say, here's some, meet your TA. It was the exact thing, but online, and it does not transfer effectively. It wasn't necessarily working well in the classroom. It's not going to work well as far as tangible, retrievable learning. So I think, to Ken's point, we can move and we can be agile, but I think we've got to really learn how to learn again. That's number one. And then how to effectively design for it, and not just jump the gun and buy things and waste. You're going to blow your budgets, and you're stuck with a technology that all you can do is do the exact same thing that we've always, for the next 100 years, we'll do it all over again.
One of the great things is, as I get to the questions that are coming in, something that's been referenced in terms of assets building, right? And there's a great approach by a gentleman named John McKnight, who's a community organizer, called assets-based community development. And I actually try to do it in organizations. I call it assets-based community development for the enterprise, ABCDE. But this idea of, rather than taking a needs-based approach, which looks at the deficits, what assets do you have? What Lego pieces, like Ken referred to, exist? And what can you build? And guess what, folks? This is the old school Lego set without the instructions. You have to use your imagination. We're in uncharted waters. Don't try to create the Millennium Falcon with the instructions. Throw those instructions away and just figure out what makes sense for the context you're in. So some questions we have coming in. The first question: what opportunities are opened up with online learning that would be difficult to replicate in person? Anybody like to take a stab at this? What opportunities are opened up with online learning that would be difficult to replicate in person?
I'll take the
Lauren.
first shot.
Sure.
And I should caveat this, obviously, as a learning designer, that's the sort of the lens that I look at this through. So what I find really, really amazing about taking some learning online, especially because we also have to keep in consideration the generation that is now coming into school. They grew up with technology, and this is the way that they communicate. So there are opportunities to leverage. So platforms, depending on what you have available to you, you can actually integrate Slack, like Suzanne had, or you can integrate Twitter feeds. I heard a wonderful story from a professor who was actually in class and recognized that his students were just kind of in la la land, and got onto Twitter himself to address his students while they were in class.
That's amazing.
So that kind of social engagement, and the level of social engagement that you can get from social media platforms and social platforms, you can't replicate that in person. So I say, within a very strategically and intentionally designed way, you can actually leverage them.
And
I
I
love
will
that.
just throw on top of that this idea of sort of networked learning, right? This idea I've always encouraged my students and my colleagues to say, if you were reading a book and you have a question for the author, what you want to do is jump on Twitter and throw that question at them. Don't write in the margin. You are able to choose your teachers now because of our connectivity in a way that we never could have done before. And I personally, I have experienced this numerous times where I went from being a reader to being an interlocutor, to being a buddy, to being a co-contributor. And I encourage everybody who's serious about learning to think about that path, because this is really how we get become lifetime and global learners, right? Is making the use of these networks that are available to us in the right and intentional way.
I also think there's an
That's great.
opportunity, if you use it effectively and you have the right resources, you can more effectively personalize that online experience, because there are ways that I think everybody tries to do that live, but it's another thing to be able to have some of that behind the scenes data that you can grab when you're in a virtual environment. And I think that's the piece that the technology helps to bolster. It doesn't replace, but I think it helps to bolster that personalized experience.
Here's a question for Dr. Medina. I think you're, given the number of hats you wear, I think this is a good question for you, because you have a great hat collection. In what specific areas do you see the most curiosity or energy to do things differently on campus? Examples: student support, career connectedness, etc. What problems are your stakeholders optimistic about solving in different ways than in the past? So I think going back to this, a lot of times we talk about universities, we only talk about faculty as if we're the only ones that exist, because let me assure you, we think we're the only ones that exist. But as we know, there happen to be other people on campus doing work too. I don't know what it is. I never talked to them, but people tell me they're around. So, Dr. Medina, in what areas of your organization are people most excited and have the most curiosity?
No, I love that, because I mean, sort of the subtitle to our talk, you know, for me as a student services or student affairs, or, you know, not primarily academic focused, is, you know, is student affairs dead? You know, are the co-curricular things, like in a time like this, they really kind of come into question a little bit, right? Which I actually see as a call to action, right? So I was actually literally thinking about the ways that this has shown up, even in conversations I had today about our, you know, theater productions. Like, those are going to be done virtually in some really cool ways. So it's not going to be the black box theater with the spotlights as we remember them, but it's going to be these interactive monologues, or how our service learning program has created a format for how do you engage an understanding of service learning in nonprofits, and the model that we use for that, the so what, now what, in a virtual space that builds an appreciation for service learning, you know, from that place. We've also, of course, in student services, we're thinking about, you know, our orientation. So we talked about the first year student experience, and how do you, our goals are to, overarching is, we want to make sure that those students and families leave conversations with us. I was about to say campus, but in this case, conversations with us, 100% convinced that they made the right decision, right? And we want to build community, and we want to strengthen commitment, and we just want to get them excited and feeling like tornadoes, right? And so, like, looking at that, but also thinking about how do we do some of our bigger marquee campus events. Like we have a campus-wide talent show, like that's a thing in student affairs and student activities. We're going to do that virtually this year. And I'm only excited because I recently was a part of a musical ensemble award ceremony through a local organization that I serve on the board for. And it was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. I was like, I can imagine what it looked like in person, but this is fabulous. And so I see it, the long answer is that I see it coming from every facet of campus, and places you wouldn't even necessarily, you know, inherently think would jump to it with enthusiasm. You know, again, as a faith-based institution, we're looking at how our campus worship happens in a virtual way that still celebrates the spirit of that. So I think it's, again, you know, I don't want to belabor the mindset. I really think y'all have made some valuable points about the learning process and about, you know, the idea of redesigning an experience that's not less than.
Right.
You know, that's really, and one thing I will add is what we're tracking is everything that we are able to curate out of this experience that we are going to retain, because
Right.
it has become, it's a realization that this is valuable within and beyond a pandemic. And so to me, as you can see, I kind of get excited talking about it, because I think those of us who are reared in higher education, particularly in the student support and services side of things, are used to showing up for students to serve and support in crisis.
Right.
But and not that we're not doing that, but we're really getting to think about is how do we make sure that students get the value of this experience in a way that's not perceived and not actually less than. So
Great. And I have one more question for President Walsh, but I will say that your answer triggered me a little bit, reminded me of the time that my oldest daughter announced to me her career goal was to make money performing online. I didn't know how I was supposed to take that. I think she was talking about on YouTube. I wasn't sure because I just kind of walked out of the room and didn't want to think about what that meant. But I appreciate the innovation and the leaning into the technology. President Walsh, last question for you as we come up against the hour. What types of specific training, or specific training have your faculty found to be most helpful to prepare them to be in this online environment? What's been working well for them?
We don't know yet. So we have
Fair
three
enough.
different opportunities right now. They're Cengage, we're using Cengage for all of our textbooks. So Cengage is working with faculty now to redo their syllabi. The other thing I didn't say is we've gone to mini-mesters, effectively block schedule for this semester and moving forward. And so there's a lot of adjustments that faculty are making. So anyway, Cengage is helping faculty. There's also some work that we're doing through UNCF, of which we're a member. They are offering training for faculty through the Gardner Institute. And then the third is AQ, which is the Association for College and University Educators. And so we have three different things, and AQ will actually continue into the semester. So some of those were just summer. AQ will continue with mentoring and coaching faculty through the semester, because that's really important. Just like Lauren was talking about learning, you don't just learn like in the 8-hour workshop and then you're done, but how do we support faculty in an ongoing way? So summer isn't enough. We're going to continue into the semester, and we can report back. I don't know what I don't know what's going to be the most important or impactful.
I will say that one of the things that's been most interesting to me is how many faculty, at least at my school, Bentley University, have been engaged in online trainings have been over the summer, right? And the whole trope of, you know, teachers don't work in the summer. Let me assure you, there always is a lot of work. There's even more work now. And one of the things I should add that our school has done, I'm sure other schools have joined in on this, is frozen the tenure clock for a lot of junior faculty, knowing that they are going to be in a situation of having to do this transformation. I should also add, we didn't get to this, unfortunately. There's a lot to talk about in an hour. How this moment is impacting female professors whose childcare responsibilities tend to take a lot of time. And I've heard some reports, I can't speak to it exactly, but the number of article submissions to journals by women scholars is down compared to male scholars. So there's a lot of impacts. There's a lot to untangle, and we only got into a little bit. But luckily for everybody who is online and interested in this topic, we can keep the conversation going at Mindshare. There are questions we didn't get to. I apologize. I wish we had more time. If there's interest, we might go for a round 2. You never know, folks. If we can talk our panel into it, be happy to do so. So if you want to continue the conversation, by all means, go to Mindshare, put down your ideas. Maybe we can talk to the folks here to corresponding. Everybody on the panel has a LinkedIn account, is active on Twitter. By all means, reach out to them. We'll include all of their handles in the notes for the show. We really appreciate all the questions we received. We also appreciate the Human Science Task Force for allowing this to happen. We also appreciate Missing Link Studios, This Anthro Life podcast, as well as Experience by Design podcast, my podcast with Adam Gamwell, which you can find everywhere that you find podcasts. So on behalf of all the sponsors, I want to thank President Walsh, Dr. Medina, the Learning Pirate, Lauren Waldman, and Ken. I want to thank Ken as well. Definitely go to EPAM Continuum. They got some brilliant stuff, especially Ken's Netflix model is genius. A lot of fodder there to explore and a lot of potential. So really quick, final thoughts, President Walsh, you're the doctor, higher ed is a patient. What is the status of the patient right now? We'll go around the room.
What is the stat? I love the question.
Code? Are we calling code, or are they getting better, or are they all healed? Where are we at?
I think we're at a rehabilitation center. We're getting some training. We're getting some stretching in. You know, there's some healing. There's going to be some spiritual. There may be like some yoga. We're at
a cleanse, maybe a cleansing diet. We need a cleanse.
I mean, let's go all the way.
High colonic,
gluten-free diet. I mean, it's going to be. But I think. But it is like, I really do think we are on, I love that question, but I really do think we are at some sort of like spa recovering and getting in our, we're getting ready for the next thing. Yeah. Cleansed.
Dr. Medina, where are we at? How's the patient doing?
You know, as a resident vegan, I was like, yeah, we're definitely going to a plant-based lifestyle at this point. We've binged on the Texas barbecue for too long. You know, I did think of a transfusion. We're getting some fresh blood infused in us, like right? Or maybe we're getting a nice shock to the chest, kind of get us, you know, back up and thinking about things.
Kind of serious, more serious than yoga. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely, I love those kind of visuals and metaphors for things. So I love this question. But at the end of the day, what I really think is higher ed is not dead. It is not dead. It is evolving. It is getting to a place where it is beginning to recognize that to survive and thrive, it must evolve. And some institutions are different. They're a little further along that path than others, but I think we're heading in the right direction. I'm hopeful as a lifelong higher education professional that our values proposition as higher ed is still one that is extremely worthwhile because it is entrenched in learning and creating global citizens. I'm optimistic.
And Lauren, what's the extent of our brain damage? You're the neuroscience person. How brain damaged is higher education? Can we rehabilitate it? What's the prognosis?
I think that if we take this opportunity right now, in this moment, the opportunity that we have to change our behaviors, to change our habits, to change our patterns and become more aware, we can really see a significant change in the way that we learn, in the way that we design learning, in the way that we approach our environments of learning. But it's now. Do it now, or I can tell you exactly, you know, shake your crystal ball, grab your magic 8-ball. It's going to be the exact same. The future is going to be the present if we don't make it the changes now. So
great. Last words, Dr. Ken.
There you go. Right from the brain.
The patient says, I'm not a patient. I'm a person, man. And it says, I think we should all go downstairs, grab a beer, get some Lego bricks, and start playing. They need to play. They want to play. The ones who are going to survive, going to thrive, are the players. And I think we got to encourage these institutions to learn how to play their way.
Can't say any better than that, so I won't. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Stay tuned for more conversation from the Human Science Task Force on this topic, along with many others. Remember to go to Mindshare to stay engaged in this conversation around this very important topic. Have a great night and a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Bye.